Stop what you are doing right now, because what I am about to tell you is the kind of story that will sit with you long after you finish it. Picture a man who has everything. And I mean everything. The kind of wealth that makes other wealthy people feel ordinary. The kind of power that makes entire rooms go quiet when he walks in. An empire built from nothing, by his own hands, over 20 years of decisions that most people would not have had the nerve to make. Now picture that same man going home alone. Not once. Not twice. 7 times in 3 months. 7 different women. 7 different nights that ended the same way, with a door closing and a silence that filled the room like smoke. Not because he was cruel. Not because he was cold. Because of one thing. One visible, physical thing that every woman who got close enough to matter decided she could not handle. He had learned to live with it. Or he thought he had. He had built his walls high enough and his reputation large enough that the rejection happened at the door before it could reach him where he actually lived. And then one Tuesday night, a woman walked through the wrong door of a hotel ballroom and saw him absorb the worst moment of a very long pattern with the kind of composure that costs everything, and she did not look away. She did not look away. I know this story because I am that woman. And what happened after that moment in the ballroom did not just change our lives. It dismantled everything we thought we knew about who we were, what we were worth, and what becomes possible when someone refuses to stop looking. There will be moments in this story that will make your jaw drop. A betrayal that reaches back 30 years. A secret buried inside a secret. A brother's confession. A war that almost happened. And an ending that I am still living inside, which is the best thing I can say about it. Before we go a single word further, I want to know where in the world you are right now. Drop your city and your country in the comments below. Whether you are reading this at midnight or on your lunch break or on a train somewhere, tell me where you are. I read every single comment, and it means everything to know where this story is landing. And if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, please do it right now before this story pulls you under. Because once it starts, you will not want to stop. My name is Celeste. And this is the story of the man that everyone had already decided to leave. The ballroom at the Meridian Hotel cost more to rent for one evening than I earned in 3 months. I knew this because I had spent the previous 4 hours in a back office auditing the financial records of one of the corporate sponsors. I was a forensic accountant. I found things people tried to hide. That was my job, and I was very good at it. I was not supposed to be at the main event. A catering staff member pointed me toward the wrong door, and I ended up inside a room full of 500 people in clothes that cost more than my car, holding a notebook and wearing the wrong shoes. I was about to turn around when I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the room, tall, broad-shouldered, in a dark suit that fit him the way expensive things fit people who were built for them. His face was the kind of face that made people look twice. Strong jaw, sharp eyes, the specific stillness of someone who had learned to take up exactly the space he chose and no more. His right hand was angled slightly away from his body. I noticed it because my younger brother holds his arm the same way. A fire when he was 12 left burns across his forearm, and he spent years learning to position himself so other people would not have to manage their reaction to it. I understood that angle immediately. I watched this man talk to a woman beside him, beautiful, in a red dress, clearly his date. Then I watched the woman say something, pick up her evening bag, and leave. Not just leave the conversation. Leave the room. Quickly, with her eyes down, like someone who needed to get out before she changed her mind. The man did not move. He stood completely still for 30 seconds. Then he picked up his drink and finished it. The scar on his right arm, running from wrist to elbow, caught the light of 500 candles. I did not look away. And that was when he turned his head and saw me watching him. He walked toward me, and I stood my ground, which surprised both of us. He was the kind of man that people instinctively stepped back from, not because he was threatening exactly, but because he carried so much gravity that it felt polite to give him room. I did not step back. He stopped in front of me and said, "You were watching?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Most people look away." I said, "I know. My brother holds his arm the same way you do." I recognized the habit. Something moved across his face. Not softness exactly. More like the specific expression of someone who has just encountered something they were not prepared for. We talked for 11 minutes at the edge of that ballroom. I counted because I count things. It is the way my brain works, cataloging details the way other people catalog feelings. He did not introduce himself as anything other than his name. Adam Cole. I did not ask what he did. We talked about the centerpiece sculpture, which we both found ugly, and about charity events as social performance, and then, without planning it, about what it was like to carry something visible that made other people uncomfortable. I showed him the small burn scar on my palm, the one I got pulling my brother out of the room. Adam went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You pulled him out." I said, "Yes." He looked at me for a long time with an expression I would spend weeks trying to name. Finally, I understood it. It was the look of someone who had just been accurately seen for the first time in longer than they could remember. He asked for my number. I gave it without hesitating. Then I went back to my filing room and sat down and stared at the wall and told myself it was nothing. Just a conversation. Just a man at a party. The next morning, my senior partner called before I had finished my first coffee. The contract at Meridian Capital, the company I had been auditing for 3 weeks, was canceled. Effective immediately. Full month's fee paid as severance. No explanation given. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long moment. Then a second call came from a number I did not recognize. A man's voice, calm and professional, telling me I should look up who I had spoken to last night before I decided whether to return his call if he made one. I typed the name into my search browser. The results took 4 seconds to load and 40 minutes to fully absorb. Adam Cole. Head of the Cole Group, legitimate holdings in real estate, private finance, and shipping across the Northeast. Investigated 3 times by federal authorities. Never charged. Connected, according to multiple investigative journalism pieces, to organized crime operations stretching from Boston to Philadelphia. The most powerful and most carefully insulated man in the Northeast criminal landscape. I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling. My phone buzzed on the desk. His name on the screen. I had given him my number 11 minutes into our first conversation, and he was calling the next morning, and I had just read 3 separate articles about his connections to organized crime. I picked up. He said, "I expected voicemail." I said, "I almost let it go to voicemail." He said, "What changed your mind?" I said, "I want to ask you something first. Did you cancel my contract at Meridian?" Silence. Then yes. I said, "Why?" He said, "Because I wanted a reason to call you that wasn't just because I wanted to." That was the most honestly manipulative thing anyone had ever said to me. I told him so. He almost laughed. I could hear the shape of it even though it did not quite make it out. I agreed to lunch and spent the next hour questioning every decision I had made in the last 18 hours. He chose a place I had suggested, a small Caribbean restaurant in Crown Heights with no dress code and plastic chairs and a menu written on a chalkboard. He arrived in a car that cost more than my apartment building and sat down across from me without any apparent discomfort and ordered the jerk chicken without opening the menu. That small thing made me relax slightly. We talked for 2 hours. He told me about the scar, not the full story, just the beginning of it. A fire when he was 9 years old. His father's warehouse. He was inside when it started. He got out. He said it the way people say things they have practiced, but not made peace with. Flat and factual, and with a specific quality of distance, the way you describe something that happened to a slightly different version of you. I told him about my brother's fire, and he listened in the way I had already noticed was distinctive about him, fully present, not waiting for his turn. When I talked, he was simply there, taking in what I said. By the time we finished eating, we had established something between us without naming it. No performances. No versions of ourselves made for other people. Just the actual thing, whatever that turned out to be. He walked me to the subway station. Did not try to put me in his car. Did not make a production of saying goodbye. I went home and sat on my couch and thought about how a man like that, with all that money and all that power, ended up the loneliest person in the room. His right-hand man was named Ray. I learned this later. But while I was sitting on my couch thinking about Adam, Ray was already on the phone explaining that the woman Adam had lunch with was not what she appeared to be. Not in a dangerous way. In a complicated way. Adam called me the following evening. His voice was tighter, more careful. He said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond." He told me that within 24 hours of our conversation at the gala, someone had run a professional background check on me. Not his people, he had not yet ordered one. The check came from a firm connected to a man named Victor Crane, his longest and most dangerous rival. A man who had been looking for leverage against Adam for 3 years. He said, "A woman I care about is the most traditional leverage there is. I don't want you involved in this without knowing." I turned the information over carefully the way I turned financial data, looking for the structure underneath it, the pattern that explained the shape. Then I said, "I'm a forensic accountant. Finding things people try to hide is what I do. What does Victor Crane not want found?" Adam went completely silent. Then he said, "I don't know yet." I said, "Then let me look." He said, "Celeste." I said, "I'm already in this. I would rather be in it with information than without." Another silence. Longer this time. He said, "Give me a day." I said, "You have 12 hours. I did not wait for the 12 hours. I started that same night with publicly available filings, corporate registrations, property records, financial disclosures connected to Victor Crane's legitimate businesses. Nothing illegal. I was simply doing what I had always done, following the shape of money through the structures designed to hide it. It took me 46 hours to find something that made me sit back and stare at the ceiling for a long time. A shell company structure buried 4 layers deep. A pattern of transfers that made no sense for any legitimate business purpose. And a financial fingerprint, a specific and identifiable way of moving money between accounts that I had seen before. Not in Crane's records. In a case I had worked 2 years ago before my senior partner pulled me off it without explanation and told me the client had decided to handle the audit internally. I had believed him. I should not have. I called Adam. He was at my apartment 20 minutes later, which meant he had been close, which meant he had people watching my building, which I decided to address another time. I laid everything out on my kitchen table. The shell companies. The pattern. The fingerprint from the old case. He sat across from me and went through all of it with the focused attention of someone who understood financial architecture even if he had learned it in a different school than I had. When I went to make coffee, he did not follow me into the kitchen. When I came back, he was looking at my bookshelf. Specifically at a framed photograph I kept between 2 accounting textbooks. He did not ask about it that night. But I saw his eyes move over the face in the photograph and then return to the files on the table, and I saw him make a decision to say nothing. I noticed. I always noticed. He asked Ray about the photograph the next morning. The face in the frame was my older brother Marcus. Different from the brother who had been in the fire, Marcus was 8 years older than me and had moved to New York 3 years ago for work. Work as a financial analyst at a firm that Ray discovered had managed legitimate financial structures for Adam's organization. Marcus had left that firm under quiet circumstances, a clear desk, and a resignation letter that the firm's senior partner had always seemed uncomfortable discussing when anyone asked. Adam called me that evening and asked me directly about Marcus. I told him what I knew, which was not much. Marcus had left the firm, told me only that there had been a disagreement about the direction of his work, and had been distant ever since. I had not pushed because Marcus had always been private. Adam was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Ray is going to send you a name. I need to know if you recognize it." The name that appeared on my phone was Daniel Shaw. I did not recognize it. Adam said, "He has been my chief financial officer for 15 years. He built the legitimate financial structures that had kept Adam's organization protected from federal investigation. He had been in every sensitive meeting, every important decision, for a decade and a half." I said, "Why are you telling me this?" Adam said, "Because the financial fingerprint you found in Crane Shell Companies matches structures that Daniel designed for me. And the name on the old case your partner pulled you off, the client you were investigating, is a holding company that Daniel controls." The air in my kitchen felt different suddenly. I said, "He used Crane as a mirror. He built the fraud in Crane structure to make it look like Crane." Adam said, "Yes." I said, "Then who is the actual target?" He said, "Me." I needed an hour to think. I sat at my kitchen table with all the files spread in front of me and built the structure the way I built every financial case, from the foundation up, testing each connection before adding the next. Daniel Shaw had built fraud inside Victor Crane's financial structure. Not to steal from Crane, but to frame him. To create the appearance that Crane was making moves against Adam, provocative enough to push Adam toward retaliation, creating conflict between them. The chaos of that conflict would allow Daniel to disappear with assets he had been quietly accumulating for years. My brother Marcus had discovered this 2 years ago at the financial firm. Instead of reporting it, he had gone to Daniel directly. Either because he was naive or because Daniel made him an offer he could not refuse when he was in debt and desperate. And I, who was brilliant at finding exactly this kind of structure, had been placed at that gala by someone who needed me to find the Crane trail without finding the trail that led back to Daniel. My senior partner, who had pulled me off the old case and canceled my Meridian contract 48 hours after the gala, was connected to Daniel's operation. I had been placed there as a tool. A forensic accountant pointed at the right wall so that nobody would think to look at the door. I picked up my phone and called Adam. I said, "I understand the whole picture now. I need to tell you something that involves my brother." He said, "I know about Marcus." I said, "Then you know I was placed at that gala." He said, "Yes." I said, "I need you to know that every decision I made from the moment I walked through that door was mine. Not Daniel's. Not my partner's. Mine." Silence. "Then I know that too." Then my phone buzzed with a second call. "Marcus." I picked up. My brother's voice was thin and frightened in the way that is unmistakable, not performed fear, real fear, the voice of someone who has run out of road. He said he needed to see me. He could not explain on the phone. He said he was sorry, which was the first time in 3 years he had said that to me about anything. I asked him, "Are you calling because you're in danger or because you need my help?" He was quiet for a moment. Then both. I told him to meet me at a diner in Woodside we had gone to as kids, when things were hard at home and we needed somewhere to sit without being watched. I named the address without thinking about whether it was safe. It was the address that felt true. I told Adam where I was going. He said he would have people outside. I said not inside. Marcus needed to feel safe enough to tell me the truth, and he would not do that with men in dark jackets positioned around the room. Adam agreed. Then Ray touched his arm and showed him something on a tablet. Adam's expression changed in a way I had not seen before. Not anger, not fear, something more fundamental than either of those. I asked what it was. He said, "Go to your brother. I will tell you when you get back." I said, "Tell me now." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he told me that the shell company trail I had mapped did not start 3 years ago when Marcus found it. It started 11 years ago. The same year as the fire at his father's warehouse. The fire that gave Adam the scar that had ended every relationship he had ever tried to have. Daniel Shaw had been connected to a property dispute involving that warehouse the year before the fire. The fire that 9-year-old Adam had been inside was not an accident. I drove to the diner with my hands steady on the wheel and my mind moving very fast. Marcus was already there when I arrived. He was thinner than the last time I had seen him, and he was holding his coffee cup with both hands the way people do when they need something to hold on to. He told me everything. His voice was flat and sequential, the voice of someone who had been rehearsing confession for months and had finally found the moment to deliver it. He had found the financial anomalies 2 years ago at the firm. He went to Daniel directly because he was 28 years old and frightened and thought confronting the problem head-on was the responsible thing to do. Daniel offered him money to stay quiet. Later, more money to actively help, specifically, to help arrange circumstances that would put me at the Meridian Gala. Daniel knew my reputation. He needed someone who would find the Crane Trail quickly and credibly. My brother gave him my name. Marcus took the money because he was in debt and desperate and had convinced himself it was not hurting anyone. 3 weeks ago, Daniel told him what the next phase of the plan actually involved. Victor Crane was going to be provoked into retaliating against Adam. Adam was simultaneously going to be flagged to federal authorities on fabricated intelligence. In the chaos of those two pressures, Daniel would move his accumulated assets and disappear. Adam would not survive that chaos intact. And I, who had seen too much by then, was not in Daniel's plan as someone who walked away clean. Marcus slid a USB drive across the table. He said, "I've been building this for 3 months. Everything. His accounts, his communications, the property records connected to the warehouse fire. I knew I needed a way out that didn't cost you everything." I looked at my brother across that table. I thought about the money he had taken. I thought about the name he had given. Then I put the USB drive in my pocket and took out my phone. Outside the diner window, a black car had been parked for 20 minutes. Not Adam's people. Ray confirmed it within 60 seconds of my text. Whoever it was had left the car on foot within the last few minutes, which meant they were close enough to have seen me arrive. Which meant they knew Marcus was with me. Adam's people moved fast. Marcus and I went through the diner kitchen and into the back alley where a car was already waiting. 20 minutes later, we were in a clean apartment in a Queens neighborhood registered to a name connected to nothing. Adam arrived 40 minutes after us. He sat across from Marcus, without speaking for a long moment. Marcus did not look away. I respected that. We spent the next 3 hours going through the USB drive. The files were more complete than any of us expected. Financial records. Timestamped communications. Property transaction documents from 11 years ago that showed Daniel Shaw had arranged the conditions that led to that fire. And one file that none of us expected. A recorded conversation between Daniel and a federal official, 3 years old. The terms of an arrangement, Daniel providing information about Adam's organization to federal investigators while simultaneously building the fraud structure that was supposed to destroy him. He had been feeding both sides for years. keeping Adam exposed enough to be monitored, but protected enough to be useful, maintaining the situation that gave Daniel access and safety. Adam listened to the recording with his eyes closed. When it finished, he sat in silence for a long time. Then he looked at me and said, "Who do we trust?" I said, "I know someone." Her name was Prosecutor Nora James. I had testified in one of her cases 4 years ago, a corporate fraud matter that powerful people had tried 3 times to make disappear. She had pursued it anyway. Her record was completely clean in the specific way that meant she had made enemies worth making. I called her from a phone Ray confirmed was secure. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "I have evidence of arson, financial fraud, a federal informant operating criminally inside a private organization, and a planned murder. I need to know if you're the right person." She was quiet for 3 seconds. "Then where are you?" We met in person. Just Nora and me, no Adam, no Ray. I laid out everything, the USB drive, my own financial mapping, Marcus's account. She listened for 40 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, she closed the folder she had been making notes in and looked at me directly. She said, "The federal official on that recording is someone I have been trying to build a case against for 2 years. You just handed me everything I needed." I went back to the apartment and told Adam. He sat with the news for a moment and then nodded once, the specific nod of someone who has been waiting a long time for the ground to hold. That same evening, Ray received a message through his network. Daniel Shaw had discovered Marcus was missing from his usual patterns. He was moving his timeline forward by 72 hours. Everything we had built was about to be tested in the next 3 days. Daniel moved fast and from multiple directions simultaneously. He contacted Victor Crane through an intermediary with fabricated evidence that Adam had ordered surveillance on Crane's family. Personal. Targeted. Exactly the kind of violation designed to push a cold rivalry into active retaliation. Crane responded immediately. His people were placed on Adam's known locations within hours. At the same time, Daniel fed fabricated intelligence to his federal contact suggesting Adam was preparing to flee the country. The goal was an arrest that would put Adam in federal custody at exactly the moment Crane's people were positioned around him. Clean, efficient, and designed to destroy from 3 directions without Daniel's name appearing anywhere. Ray's source inside Crane's operation flagged the approach within 4 hours. We knew Daniel had moved up his timeline. We also knew something else. Someone had fed Daniel information about where Marcus was being kept. Marcus's cell phone had received a call from our mother the previous night, and the phone had pinged a tower near the apartment. Daniel was not at the building when Ray arrived with 4 of Adam's most trusted people. He was 20 feet from the entrance, with 2 men beside him and the specific expression of someone who believed they still had control of the situation. He did not. Adam arrived 7 minutes later. He walked into the lobby and looked at Daniel. 15 years of trust, 15 years of access, 15 years of a man who had been inside everything and said nothing for a long time. Daniel looked back at him. And then he said something that nobody in that lobby expected. He said, "I did not order that fire." The lobby went completely still. Adam's expression did not change. Daniel said, "Your father started it. Insurance fraud. He needed the payout and the warehouse was the only asset large enough. He asked me to help arrange the paperwork and I did. But you were supposed to be at school. Nobody knew you were inside." He said it without self-pity or strategy, with the flat, exhausted delivery of a man who has been carrying a specific guilt for 30 years and has finally run out of reasons to keep it. He said, "I spent 15 years inside your organization because I owed you that. A 9-year-old boy had that scar because of a plan I helped his father make." Adam was still for a very long time. The kind of stillness that is not emptiness, but the opposite, completely full, processing something that reorganizes the entire structure of what you thought you understood. Then he said, "That doesn't cover what you were planning to do." Daniel said, "No, it doesn't." Adam stepped back. He told Ray to call Nora James. I was on the phone with Adam during all of this. He had not realized the call from earlier had not disconnected. I heard everything, the confession, the silence, the decision at the end. I sat in the apartment with Marcus beside me and listened to the lobby go quiet and understood that Adam had just been handed the truth about the worst moment of his childhood and had chosen to respond to it with complete self-control. That said more about who he was than anything I had read in any article. Nora's team moved before dawn. Federal warrants executed simultaneously Daniel Shaw, his federal contact, 3 shell company principals, and 2 of Crane's financial officers whose names appeared in the evidence I had mapped. Crane himself was brought in for questioning. When he was shown the fabricated evidence Daniel had used to manipulate him, his fury redirected completely. He provided testimony about the approach that confirmed Daniel's operation on the record. By 7 in the morning, it was largely finished. The war that Daniel had been building between Adam's organization and Crane's never happened because the man constructing it was in federal custody. Marcus cooperated fully. Nora negotiated an agreement, complete testimony in exchange for a suspended sentence and supervised release. It was more than he deserved and less than he feared, and the only outcome I had been willing to accept. Adam sat in his office at 8 in the morning with coffee going cold on the desk beside him and the specific quiet of a man watching a shadow he has lived under for 30 years finally lift. I did not call him that morning. I did not call him the following morning either. I needed to think about something that had nothing to do with Daniel or Crane or my brother's choices or federal warrants. I needed to think about what it meant that I had been placed at that gala as a tool and had chosen, every single time, at every single decision point, to be something else instead. I needed to think about whether what I felt for the man sitting in that office was real or whether it had been built, without my knowledge, by someone else's plan. It took me 3 days to work it out. I called Adam on the 4th morning. He answered on the first ring, which told me he had been waiting. I said, "I need to tell you what I've been thinking about." He said, "Tell me." I said, "I was placed at that gala. Someone decided I should be there and arranged for it to happen. That's true, and I'm not pretending it isn't. But every conversation I had with you, every decision I made, to stay, to look, to dig, to help, that was mine. Nobody arranged that. I need you to know that I know the difference." He said, "I know the difference too." I said, "I want to ask you something." He said, "Ask." I asked him about who he was before the organization. Before the scar and the reputation and the 15 years of building something that had kept him powerful and kept him alone. I asked who the person was before all of that. He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I wanted to be an architect." He told me about the notebook he had kept when he was 9. Full of sketches of buildings, how they were made, how they stood, what made some of them last for centuries. He had been in the warehouse the day of the fire because he had snuck in to sketch the structural beams, which he found beautiful. He had never told anyone about the notebook. Not because it was a secret. Because nobody had ever asked who he was before. I said, "Can I see you?" He said yes. He came to my apartment in Crown Heights. Not a restaurant, not his space, mine. I made dinner and we ate at my small table, and the conversation moved the way conversations move when 2 people have been through something real together and come out the other side, still choosing to be there. At some point during the evening, Adam had his right arm resting on the table between us. Not angled away. Not positioned to minimize the scar. Simply resting there, in the light of my kitchen lamp, the same as everything else about him. I was not looking at it. I was looking at his face. He noticed that I was not looking at it, and something crossed his expression, complicated and quiet and moving so fast I almost missed it. I said, "It's part of you. I'm interested in all of you." He said, "Every woman I have ever tried to be with has left because of it." I said, "Then they were looking for someone perfect." I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, "I'm looking for someone real." He looked at me across my kitchen table, and I watched him absorb those words, not just hear them, actually absorb them, the way a person absorbs something they have needed for a very long time and had stopped expecting to receive. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. For the first time since I had known him, he smiled without anything underneath it. No management, no performance, no wall keeping the expression at the appropriate professional distance. Just a smile, clean and complete. He showed me the screen. A text from Nora James. The federal case was fully confirmed. Everything would hold. I looked at the message and then at him. He said, "It's over." I said, "No. I think it's starting." 6 months pass the way 6 months pass when you are building something carefully, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the specific attention of people who understand that the things worth having take time to become solid. Nora contracted me as a financial forensics consultant for her office. Permanent. Federal. The security clearance that came with it was several levels above anything I had held in private practice. The work was meaningful in the way I had always wanted work to be and had told myself I was content without. Marcus testified in the spring. His cooperation agreement held. He called me from Atlanta afterward, where he had gone to rebuild something resembling a normal life. He said, "I know I can't ask for forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm trying to be worth it." I said, "Then keep going." Adam's transition from his organization was not a single dramatic moment. It was slow and deliberate and guided by legal counsel Nora helped him find, converting legitimate holdings, stepping back from the rest over 18 months. He began taking architecture courses online at night. He did not tell anyone except me. I found his notebook one evening on the kitchen table in his apartment, a new one, black cover, full of structural sketches that were beautiful in the specific way of someone who had been waiting 30 years to make them. I looked at the sketches for a moment. Then I put the notebook back exactly where it had been and went to the kitchen and told him dinner was ready. He knew I had seen it. I knew he knew. Neither of us made it into a moment. We did not need to. 3 weeks after the federal case closed, Victor Crane sent Adam a formal message through legal channels. Not a threat, not a negotiation. A request for a meeting, quiet, private, no representatives. Adam went. I did not know he was going until afterward. Crane told him something that Adam told me that evening sitting on my couch with his right hand resting open on his knee, the scar visible in my living room light. Crane said, "Daniel played us both. I've spent 3 years building against you when the real problem was sitting in your own office." Adam had said, "It means we stop handing the same man a knife." Crane had agreed. There was no alliance formed. No dramatic resolution of a decades-long rivalry. Just 2 powerful men in a room acknowledging that they had been managed by the same person and choosing not to be managed anymore. Adam told me all of this and then said, "You know what's strange? The scar never came up. He never looked at it." I said, "Some people look at what's actually in the room." He looked at me. He said, "Yes, some people do." We sat in comfortable silence for a while after that. The apartment was quiet. Outside, the city continued in its endless motion, completely unaware of everything that had happened or everything that was beginning. I thought about the ballroom. The wrong door. The sculpture we both found ugly. 11 minutes that I had counted because I count things. I thought about what it means to look at someone directly when every other person in the room has decided to look somewhere else. It does not take courage exactly. It just takes the willingness to keep looking until you see what is actually there. Adam saw what was actually there in me too. He looked at me, the woman who had been placed at that gala as a tool, who had a brother who had made terrible choices, who carried her own small burn scar on her palm, and he did not decide what I was before he finished looking either. We chose each other with full information. That is rarer than it sounds. Adam showed me the notebook in the spring. Not accidentally, deliberately, one evening when I was at his apartment and he came out of his home office with it in his hand and set it on the table between us. I looked at the sketches for a long time. They were extraordinary in the way that things are extraordinary when a person has been working on something for 30 years without an audience, complete, private, honest. Buildings that did not exist anywhere except in his mind and on those pages. Structures that held improbably, beautifully, with attention to every point of tension. I said, "These are remarkable." He said, "I haven't shown anyone before." I said, "Why now?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because you're the first person I've trusted with the things I actually care about." I looked at him across that table. The notebook open between us. His arm resting without any particular management, the scar in the evening light, completely ordinary in the specific way that something becomes ordinary when it is simply part of a person you love. I said, "I think you should enroll in an actual program, not just the online courses." He said, "I'm 41 years old." I said, "The person who designed that," and I pointed to a sketch of a bridge, "is not someone who should be taking online courses." He looked at the sketch for a long moment. Then he said, "You think I could do it?" I said, "I think you've been doing it your whole life. You just haven't had anyone tell you to call it what it is." He registered for a part-time architecture program the following month. I found out because he called me after submitting his application and said, "I just did something terrifying." I said, "Good." Nora James closed the full federal case 14 months after that night at the lobby. The federal official connected to Daniel's arrangement received 7 years. Daniel received 12. The shell company structure was dismantled completely. The evidence Marcus had built across 3 months of careful documentation was cited in the closing brief as central to the prosecution's case. Nora called me the morning of the verdict. She said, "You know what you did, don't you?" I said, "I did my job." She said, "You did considerably more than your job." I thought about that for a while after I hung up. About what it meant to do more than your job. To keep looking past the point where looking becomes uncomfortable. To follow the structure all the way down to what actually holds everything up. I had been a forensic accountant for 9 years when I walked through the wrong door at the Meridian Hotel. I was good at finding things people tried to hide. That was true. But I had not walked toward Adam in that ballroom because I was doing my job. I had walked toward him because a boy with burns on his forearm had taught me, 20 years earlier, what it costs a person to manage other people's discomfort with themselves. I had decided at 11 years old, standing in a hospital room watching my brother angle his arm away from the nurses who did not mean to flinch, but did anyway, that I would not be one of the people who made someone do that. I had held that decision for 20 years without knowing when it would matter. It mattered on a Tuesday night in a ballroom I was not supposed to be in, watching a man stand completely still for 30 seconds after a woman left him in front of 500 people. Everything else followed from that one decision to stay present. Marcus called me on the first anniversary of the gala. He was in Atlanta, working at a small accounting firm that did not know his full history and had hired him anyway because he was very good with numbers. He said, "I've been trying to figure out how to say something to you for a year." I said, "Then say it." He said, "I put you in danger." I gave your name to a man who was planning to use you and discard you, and I told myself it was fine because you were smart enough to handle it. And that was the most cowardly thing I have ever done. Not the money. Not the covering up. The part where I told myself your safety was something I could gamble with. I sat with that for a moment. I said, "You're right. That was the worst part." He said, "I know." I said, "Are you telling me this because you need me to forgive you?" He said, "No. I'm telling you because I owed you the honest version and I kept giving you the shorter one." I said, "Then thank you for the honest version." We talked for a while after that, not about any of it, just about regular things. Our mother's garden. A television show he had started watching. The accounting firm's new software, which he described with the specific irritation of someone who had opinions about software. By the end of the call, he sounded more like Marcus than he had in 3 years. Not fixed. Not resolved. Just present, which was where I needed him to be. I told Adam about the call that evening. He listened without commenting until I finished. Then he said, "He's trying." I said, "Yes." He said, "That's what matters." I looked at him and thought about all the ways that sentence applied to more than just Marcus. This is where the story ends. Or rather, this is where this part of the story ends, because the actual story is still going and does not have a final chapter yet, which is the best thing I can say about it. Adam is in his 2nd year of the architecture program. His professor, who is 73 and has been teaching for 40 years, told him after his first major project submission that he had the structural instincts of someone who had been thinking about buildings his whole life. Adam called me immediately after that conversation, and I could hear in his voice the specific quality of someone receiving recognition they have been waiting for since they were 9 years old. I am still at Nora's office. The work continues to be meaningful. I am currently building a case that I cannot discuss, but which involves a financial structure so deeply buried that 3 previous teams missed it entirely. I find this satisfying in the way that I find most things that require full attention satisfying. My brother with the burned forearm got married last autumn. His wife is a physical therapist who, on the evening they met, looked directly at his arm and said, "What happened?" Not flinching, not performing comfort, just asking because she wanted to know. He told me afterward that it was the first time he had answered that question without bracing first. He said it was the strangest feeling, like putting something down he had not realized he was still carrying. I understood that. The thing about a scar is that it does not disappear. It does not fade the way people say it will. It does not become invisible with time or love or the right person. It stays exactly where it is. On the skin, in the history, in the shape of the person who carries it. What changes is not the scar. What changes is what the scar means to the person carrying it. Whether it is the thing that defines them or simply one of the true things about them. Whether it is what other people see first or what they see eventually, the way you see eventually that a building is beautiful not despite the evidence of weather and time, but because of it. Adam had done the same thing for 30 years. Perfected the angle. Built the wall high enough that the rejection happened at the wall instead of at the person. What he had not done, what nobody had given him the chance to do, was simply exist in a room with someone who was not managing anything. Who was not performing comfort or pretending not to notice or deciding in advance that they could handle it. I was not performing anything. I had not been since the ballroom. I had simply looked at him the way I looked at everything, directly, completely, trying to understand the structure underneath. The scar was part of the structure. So was the notebook. So was the 9-year-old boy who sketched structural beams because he found them beautiful. So was the man who had built an empire because it was the world available to him and had done it methodically and with attention to what holds and what collapses. All of it was Adam. All of it was real. All of it was worth staying for. There is a moment I think about more than any other from that year. It was a Tuesday morning, 8 months after the gala. Adam was reading something at my kitchen table. I was making coffee. His right arm was resting on the table in the morning light, the scar visible, the arm simply there, not positioned or managed or angled away from anything. It was not a dramatic moment. Nothing was resolved or declared in it. Nobody said anything meaningful. It was just breakfast. But I understood in that moment what this story actually means. Not that one woman was brave enough or good enough or special enough to love a man that others had rejected. That is a story about her virtue, and it is the wrong story. The right story is simpler and harder than that. Adam had been rejected his whole life not because of what he was, but because of what people decided he was before they finished looking. I did not reach a different conclusion because I was braver than other people. I reached it because I did not stop looking when looking became uncomfortable. That is what forensic accounting teaches you, if it teaches you anything. The truth is always in the structure. You have to be willing to go all the way down before you find what actually holds everything up. What held Adam up was not the organization or the money or the wall. It was the 9-year-old with a notebook. The person who survived the fire and built something in its place and never stopped believing, underneath all the rejection, that someone might eventually look long enough to find him. I found him. He found me. We built something together in the ruins of other people's plans. And it turned out to be the most solid thing either of us had ever been part of. Adam and I have breakfast at my kitchen table most mornings. His arm rests on the table. The scar catches the morning light. Neither of us manages anything about it. We are just two people having breakfast, which is ordinary, which is everything. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think about the things you look at and the things you decide to look away from, then you already know what this channel is about. We tell stories that go all the way down. The ones that are uncomfortable before they are beautiful. The ones that cost something before they give something back. Before you leave, drop your city and country in the comments right now. Tell me where in the world this story found you. Whether it is late at night or early in the morning or somewhere in between, I want to know. I read every single one. And if you are not yet subscribed, please do it right now. Hit that button before you close this page. The next story is already coming, and it is the kind that will stop you mid-scroll and hold you until the very last word. Thank you for staying to the very end. It means more than you know. See you in the next one.